I'm going to start off this reaction and analysis segment with a different tone and premise than the one that I typically use on college football with Sam. But my reaction to this game is best summed up in a statement. And that statement is the Nebraska Cornhuskers will go bowling in Matt Rhule's first year for the 2023 college football season. Could that be an overreaction? Absolutely. But before we determine whether it's an overreaction, and the only way we'll be able to determine that is at the end of the season, I think, we're 6 games in. Nebraska's entering a bye on October 14th this weekend. At this point, all you can do if you're Nebraska is improve upon your identity. You're 6 games in, your identity, who you are, what you are, your scheme, a lot of that's already set in stone. And since your toughest competition was played at the beginning of the season, Michigan on September 30th was Nebraska's toughest game by a mile, and Minnesota is one of the better teams in the Big Ten West. Colorado is honestly at the same level as a lot of lower tier Big Ten teams like Indiana, Northwestern, Illinois. I'd say Colorado's better than Indiana and Northwestern, but around that level of an Illinois and a Purdue, in my mind. I'd be very curious, by the way, to see Colorado face Iowa, like the all-out, quick tempo, air raid spread with no defense, facing off a team with excellent special teams, excellent defense, but an offense that is somehow worse than he who shall not be named, his offense last season. By the way, he who shall not be named obviously is Brian Ferentz. But anyway, to get back on topic, Nebraska's schedule from here on out consists of Northwestern at home, Purdue at home after the Northwestern game, which is homecoming, to begin the November slate, a road trip to Michigan State, who right now is on life support, and the plug might be pulled on life support when Penn State faces, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, who will probably beat them by a combined 100 points, if not more, by how they're playing right now. Return to Lincoln, Nebraska Memorial Stadium to face off Maryland, a road trip at Wisconsin, and the rivalry game on Friday, November 4th to play for the Heroes Trophy against Iowa at home. Northwestern, Purdue, at Michigan State, Maryland, at Wisconsin, Iowa. 4 home games, 2 road trips, and right now every team except Maryland, Wisconsin, and Iowa are sub 500. And I would argue Iowa's record is overly inflated. They have played trash outside of Penn State, who they lost 31-0 on the road against. So, looking at that schedule, I see 3 or 4 wins, and dare I say it, perhaps on how Maryland is as a team, or Iowa, or even Wisconsin, 5-1 is possible. I'd say 6-0 is probably unlikely, like I discussed with Corn Crazed in our preview video for Nebraska and Michigan. And I think I, overstepped the line there in saying that Nebraska after Michigan has a slight chance of winning out. I don't think that's the case anymore. Partially because Wisconsin proved me wrong and beat Rutgers, and I thought Rutgers was going to go into Camp Randall and upset them. But 5-1 I think is possible. 4-2, 3-3 more likely. You win at least 3 games, you're going bowling. And I think that Nebraska is better than Northwestern, they're better than Purdue, they're better than Michigan State. That's already 3 wins. And they have home field advantage against Iowa and Maryland, who I would say Maryland's slightly better than Nebraska. Iowa's about the same level. Wisconsin on the road's their toughest game, and they'll probably lose that game. But what do you think about Nebraska's chances of going bowling? Because I think they're pretty high. And I just wanted to start off the episode with that. I know it's different, but I think the Cornhuskers are going to a bowl game in Matt Rhule's first year, and that curse, that streak of not having been to a bowl game since 2016 is going to be broken this year. I think that's very likely. Welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's your host, College Football with Sam, and before we dive in to the game, Not talking about, the future schedule of Nebraska or even Illinois, but diving into this matchup and what it means and what's going on. Make sure to hit that big red subscribe button and also click the notification bell so you can get notified when I post more Nebraska football, Big Ten football, and college football content. We are the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube, and we're trying to become one of the largest and best college football channels on YouTube. So subscribing to the channel and liking this video, and also commenting your thoughts and analysis down below, all of this helps us gain traction in the algorithm and engagement, and also helps us create an even better community than the one that we have right now. Also, click the link to my Patreon via the link in the description. My Patreon page has exclusive content depending on your tier, and that exclusive content involves weekly picks for games, along with picks and analysis from my potential power, which is a power ranking system designed to predict games and also state who the best teams in the country are from all Power 5 conferences in order to, from number 1 to number 69, as there are 69 Power 5 football teams. So check out my Patreon page via the link in the description, and we're trying to hit 20,000 subscribers by the end of the season, so if you can share this video around and get other people to subscribe, I'd appreciate it. But to get back to the topic on deck, Nebraska beat Illinois soundly by a score of 20-7. And the score is deceitful because the beating was really more severe than that. Illinois was given at the beginning of the game around a 60% chance to win, according to ESPN's FPI. Well, by the end of the first quarter, beginning of the second, it was already about 50-50. And by halftime, the Football Power Index machine favored Nebraska to win by 78%. The game was already well in Nebraska's hands by halftime when they led 17-7, and they kicked a field goal in the third quarter before having several offensive hiccups in the late third quarter and whole fourth quarter. But their defense, with Tony White and that aggressive, mean 3-3-5, they shut Illinois down completely. I mean, that was dominance. That's what you want to see if you're a Nebraska fan. Matt Rhule's identity came out of the cocoon and just wrecked Illinois. Now, Illinois is nothing special. They're one of the worst teams in the Big Ten, one of the worst teams in the Power 5. But a win, if you're Nebraska, a win is a win. And Illinois played Penn State competitively. They attempted a near comeback against Kansas. And they also played competitively, not in a good way, with Toledo and Florida Atlantic. But nonetheless, they're a Brett Bielema team. They're always going to put up a fight. And Nebraska has had a history, as we know, of choking games and of having Scott Frost moments. That's what a Scott Frost moment is. It's synonymous with a Nebraska moment, which is a popularized term for someone choking a lead or blowing a game that they should have won. And Nebraska didn't do that. Nebraska, Illinois came out and they drove all the way down the field. And Nebraska got a goal line stand. And then Nebraska went down and produced a field goal off of that goal line stand after being put in very difficult territory because of their, 4th and goal stop. That was awesome. That is facing adversity, coming out and then just punching Illinois in the mouth. It was very impressive. And who you can assign responsibility for Nebraska's success to is Heinrich Haarberg. He's my player of the game. Heinrich Haarberg in total had 236 yards, 1 touchdown, and he was the offense. Make no mistake about that. He was the offense. 154 passing yards, and he had 82 rushing yards. He led the team in passing and in rushing, and with how he's built, if he played tight end or had a trick play, he could potentially, in some situations, lead the team in receiving. He's an amazing overall athlete. He had a 66 quarterback efficiency rating, and he threw 1 interception. He also had some pretty mediocre passes and struggled with accuracy at times, but 6'5", 215 pounds. He's thrown 4 touchdowns and 2 interceptions on the season with 631 passing yards, and on the ground he's had 352 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. he's an impressive player. And he's a young player, a sophomore, so he has more time to be developed and to execute and to learn. And I was impressed with his play. That's why he was player of the game to me. He took advantage of Illinois' failed kickoff recovery, which is just weird. You don't see this typically. And most people wouldn't know this rule because it's a rare feat that, the receiving team doesn't catch the kickoff. But Illinois didn't muff the kickoff. They just didn't recover it. It was very, very strange. The kick got caught in the wind and it landed in a weird spot, and Illinois didn't pick it up. So Nebraska therefore recovered their own kickoff in sort of a weird onside, but at the same time not onside kick fashion. It was very interesting, total inexcusable moment for Illinois. I mean, that was probably the low point for Illinois is you saw that performance and you're thinking, what are you doing? The Illinois Fighting Illini are now 2-4, 0-3 in Big Ten play. And I don't know where they go from here. I mean, Luke Altmaier is horrible. Absolutely horrendous. He's not a good quarterback. And Illinois, they have potential at offensive line. I rated their offensive line as higher than Nebraska's before this game. That might have been a key mistake. And I thought that they had good running backs and that Brett Bielema loves to run the football. Well, guess what happened? Luke Altmaier had 47 passing attempts and Illinois had 19 carries for 21 yards. That's obviously, adjusted for sacks, but it is what it is. If you took out sacks, it still wouldn't even be 2 yards per carry. It's ridiculous. They couldn't run the football all day long. Illinois couldn't. They struggled. And it really is embarrassing because that's the bread and butter of any Brett Bielema offense. And they have Julian Pearl, and they have, I think Josh Kruitz is the name of their center. They have players who have potential and who are good. But ultimately, they couldn't execute. They really struggled executing in run blocking, in pass blocking as well, because Nebraska got to Altmaier. They had 2 sacks, 6 tackles for loss. Their secondary played at a high level, collecting 7 pass deflections, and the defense was just vicious all day long. Much like how I talked about in my Michigan-Minnesota video that I released earlier today, a stark difference between these two teams was quarterback play. Not as severe as Michigan-Minnesota. Part of the reason Luke Altmaier performed so badly is similarly to what's happened all season is he doesn't have much of a supporting cast, honestly. At least Heinrich Haarberg has Anthony Grant, and surprisingly has somewhat of an offensive line to protect him. Nebraska's offensive line has looked more impressive each week, and overall much more impressive this year than it has any year under Scott Frost. But to cancel out improvements at offensive line, the passing skill level at quarterback has been worse than it was with Martinez or Casey Thompson, and there are injuries at wide receiver. Isaiah Garcia-Castaneda is out for the season. That's very unfortunate, and Xavier Betts quit the team before the season, and both of those guys Nebraska could have used. But here we are, and injuries and guys leaving the team, that's a part of the game, especially with the transfer portal. So you have to face adversity, and you have to take it head on and pull yourself up. And that's what Nebraska has done. I mean, they have 3 losses. They lost to Minnesota. They, blew an opportunity against Colorado to redeem themselves, and then Michigan humiliated them. But Nebraska, I don't know. Did they redeem themselves against Illinois? I mean, they won by 13 points. I predicted them to win 31-20, and the game was more low scoring than I anticipated, albeit because both teams combined for 6 turnovers, and if you count the awful kickoff play by Illinois, that can be 7 turnovers, and both teams also failed multiple times on 4th down. Illinois being, the team who went for it 4 times on 4th down and came up empty 3 out of those 4 times. It's ridiculous. Illinois is a horrible football team. But I don't want to say that and discredit Nebraska's win because I think Nebraska is better than a lot of people anticipate. If they can run the football, if their offensive line can continue to improve and they can stay healthy with the players they have, this can be a team that competes, dare I say it, for the West Division. You say that Nebraska has 2 conference losses, and they do, and they're probably picking up a third at best. It sucks. But last year, Purdue went to Indy with 3 conference losses, and several tiebreakers went in the way of favoring Purdue to go to Indianapolis. And at one point in the season, it looked like Illinois had the West in the bag. Then they lost to Michigan State, they lost to Purdue, and they lost to Michigan. The West is a weird division, and part of me is sad that it's going away, because even though it's horrendous football and it's just a free ticket for whoever wins the East to win the conference or pick up, their 13th or 12th or 11th win of the season, really, in my mind, there is some entertaining football if you're a weird person like me that goes on, because you never know. The West is never figured out. At least that's been that way for really the past 3-4 years. Ever since 2018, the West remains largely a mystery until the end of the regular season. And there's beauty in that. And I think that will extend to parts of the whole Big Ten. It's extending to the Pac-12 right now, and it will extend to the SEC next year, with divisions being removed. But the Big Ten East and the Big Ten really for the past several years has been the Michigan, Ohio State more so, and at times, if not for those 2 teams, it would have been the Penn State Invitational. It would have been only those teams. Wisconsin, under Paul Chryst, had some good seasons, but really they never had the talent and the head coaching and the assistants to make a big win. They just didn't. So, all in all, I think that Nebraska can compete for the West. They'll have to have some kind of 3-way tiebreaker with Minnesota to get an edge over the Gophers. And I think the Gophers, with a tougher schedule, are possibly put at a disadvantage right now. They have a loss to Northwestern and to Michigan, and they still have Ohio State on the schedule, and Wisconsin, and a road trip to Iowa. They have the tougher remaining schedule than Nebraska does. Wisconsin right now has no conference losses, so they're the favorite. But weird things can happen, and with a quarterback like Heinrich Haarberg with his running, with Anthony Grant, who's a very reliable running back, I think in this game he also had a fumble, if my memory serves me correctly. Yes, he did, and he lost it, but he's a good, reliable running back. I mean, he really is. 20 carries, 56 yards. He averaged 2.8 yards per carry, just under 3, but then again, he's not playing behind an amazing guard, center, or tackle room, and Illinois' defensive line is not their problem. Their problem is linebacker and defensive back. Their defensive line has, Keith Randolph, Jerzon Newton, just phenomenal players. Illinois' problem relies on their perimeter play on defense and everything but the wide receiver room on offense, where Isaiah Williams is one of the better wide receivers in the whole Big Ten. So Heinrich Haarberg is my player of the game, but also look for him to make strides, I think, in the future, because with his build, with how he tries his best not to make mistakes, and it's rare, actually, that he makes mistakes, both in fumbling and turning it over, and just the intensity that he plays with, too. There's a passion that he plays with that I really like. Uses every opportunity to his advantage. And it was good to see Jeff Sims on the sidelines cheering him on. And, both of them obviously have good chemistry. I think that Nebraska's culture is really beginning to blossom. Even if they don't go bowling this year, going right now 3-3, likely picking up several more wins throughout the rest of their second half of the season, I think there's going to be momentum and optimism for the 2024 season. Again, don't want to overreact, but I told you at the beginning of the video, I'm starting off the video differently. Really, the entire video is a little different because we have to talk about Nebraska and even Illinois in a different way than I talk about Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, who are all undefeated, and all, especially Michigan, I think after this week, it's been clear, are college football playoff contenders. Nebraska is already out of the New Year's Six Bowl conversation. Like, when it comes to trophies, unless it's the Big Ten West Division's final year championship, you're not looking for much, or maybe a bowl game that I, as a Michigan fan, would maybe scoff at. But from a college football perspective, an objective perspective, this is a big win for Nebraska. And it's not a good loss or a good look for Illinois whatsoever. Illinois had 310 offensive yards, 1 touchdown. And that 1 touchdown came off of a busted play, which, frankly, I looked at that play and I immediately thought Nebraska moment. That was not good coverage, even better play by Illinois' offense to execute on that lone touchdown. That lone touchdown, of course, was brought in by Pat Bryant. I think that was as long of 46. That was the long pass of the day, I think. Yes, it was. 5 plays, 76 yards, a minute 45. That was a play that, entering halftime, obviously gave Illinois some momentum. Their offense was dead from their first drive to their last drive in the second half. And in the second half, the offense for Illinois did make some strides. They did, but fumbles and interception thrown by Altmaier and all this different chaos just threw Illinois out of the conversation for even winning this game. Look, if you're Brett Bielema, what are you doing? Honestly, if you're Brett Bielema, you're 2-4, you're 0-3. Need I remind you, 0-3 in Big Ten conference play. And what sucks about that is, we talked in the preseason, Illinois is one of the easier schedules of all Big Ten teams. In the preseason, Toledo, Florida Atlantic, and Kansas, that was one of the harder non-conference schedules for a Big Ten team in my mind. But Penn State at home, and getting Penn State before they play Iowa, which means that had the potential to be a trap game, that was their toughest Big Ten game. Then after that, it was probably hosting Wisconsin or playing on the road at Minnesota. And after their game against Nebraska, they travel on the road to play Maryland this week. Then they host Wisconsin before Wisconsin plays Ohio State. That could be a trap game, but also I think Wisconsin's much better than Illinois. Then Illinois is a bye. Then they travel at Minnesota, host Indiana, travel at Iowa, and play Northwestern in their rivalry game. So you're 2-4 right now. And look, even though there's no more Penn State on the schedule and Kansas would probably place second, if not outright win the Big Ten West. That's how bad the West is, but also how much Kansas has improved over the past few seasons. They're definitely a top 20 team, in my opinion. This is kind of hopeless. I mean, I thought Illinois was going to take a step back, but a slight step back. They lost a ton of production, but they returned Jerzon Newton, Keith Randolph, and Tayra Edwards, and they returned half of their offensive line about. Reggie Love III is a reliable running back, and Casey Washington, Pat Bryant, Isaiah Williams, and then Tip Ryman, the tight end. That's a decent skill position set. And Brett Bielema from year one had an okay offensive line. I mean, stepped in, took over Lovie Smith's disaster, and in year one, they were able to run the football and cause some chaos. 2021 Illinois was far better and far more competent than this team was. They may have had some lower lows, like losing to UTSA and struggling against the lowest members of the Big Ten and going 5-7, but at least that team could go on the road and beat Penn State or go on the road and beat Minnesota, who were ranked at the time when they played them in 2021. This Illinois team is lifeless. They are totally and utterly lifeless. They are beyond redemption, especially that offensive line. I don't know how you have the talent that they do at offensive line and still play that way. I don't get it. Illinois on the season has struggled to run the football, and Luke Altmaier, even with his mobility, again, I don't get it. Why isn't he being used more with the run? He can run the football. Is the rest of the supporting cast that bad that they just want to keep him healthy? Illinois right now is only rushing for 4.1 yards per carry. 7 rushing touchdowns. And again, this is with a schedule that is just, it's an easy schedule, to be frank. One of their better rushing performances was against Penn State. And still, because of sack numbers adjusted, they still didn't have that good of a running game. But it is what it is. Luke Altmaier leads the team in rushing touchdowns, and really, if Illinois wants to win, Altmaier's play has to improve because Reggie Love III and Josh McCray behind that offensive line are not going to be consistent. They won't be threats. Altmaier, his play has to step up, and right now he has 8 interceptions, 6 passing touchdowns, a 126.6 passer rating. He has a higher ceiling as a passer than, surprisingly, a lot of Big Ten quarterbacks. Like, I think he has a higher ceiling than Noah Kim. I think maybe even more so than Tanner Mordecai. Mordecai's been very underwhelming at Wisconsin, but his floor isn't as low as Altmaier's. Altmaier has a lot of talent, but his floor is, it's like basement full of water level low. It's that bad. And with his continued play at quarterback, with the way that he's played through half the season, I don't see how Illinois isn't going to fall apart and potentially finish like 3-9, 4-8, and be Brett Bielema's worst season with the Fighting Illini. So I think this is his worst team, Brett Bielema's worst team at Illinois since coming to the school. The team's falling apart, and overall this just isn't a good look for the football program. It really isn't. So can they turn the season around? Who knows, but we're going to have to wait and see on that one. For Nebraska, 312 offensive yards, but 2 touchdowns, 2 field goals, and they left some points on the board with a fumble in the red zone and also, I think, a missed field goal or 2. They were definitely the better team, and they played better than the initial score would have indicated for you. Haarberg, 12 of 24 for 154 yards, 1 interception, also 18 carries for 82 yards and a touchdown. Very serviceable quarterback. Extremely serviceable. By the way, Tristan Alvano, long of 32, and he was 2 of 3 for field goals. So he didn't miss 2 field goals, he just missed 1. Brian Buschini just averaged 33 yards per punt attempt. That isn't very good. So special teams was far from perfect from Nebraska. Still better than Illinois special teams unit with that just disastrous letting Nebraska recover their own kickoff without it even being an onside kick attempt. That's just bad. And Caleb Griffin was 0 of 1 on field goals, and Hugh Robertson didn't average 40 yards per punt either, but he averaged 39. So better than Buschini's. But anyway, the point that I'm trying to make with Nebraska is they showed themselves to be the much better team. They're still in contention for the Big Ten West Championship, although Minnesota has an advantage due to a head-to-head win. Iowa has an edge due to the fact that they also have an easy schedule remaining, and they only have 1 conference loss. And Wisconsin, having no conference losses, also has an edge, and also the fact that I think objectively Wisconsin is a much better team than Nebraska, and probably a much better team than any team in the Big Ten West. But they still have Ohio State on their schedule, and Ohio State is a much better team than any other team the West is going to have to face for the rest of the year outside of Purdue. Purdue has to play Ohio State and Michigan, and Minnesota has to travel on the road to play Ohio State at the end of the year, so that would be a tougher challenge than Wisconsin, who's hosting Ohio State, especially after what will likely be a big emotional game against Penn State, whether that's a win or loss for the Buckeyes. But the run game, Nebraska averaged over 3 yards per carry. They averaged around 6 yards per pass attempt. It was just a good performance, and they earned their first Big Ten win of the 2023 season. They'll compete for the West. I really like what Matt Rhule has in this team. I truly do. And if you're a Nebraska fan, I think I watched part of Corn Crazed's reaction. I'm looking forward to his in-depth breakdown, which might have already been released, or it's going to be released soon here. I'm just happy. I'm happy for you all. Go Big Red. I said after my reaction to the Michigan-Nebraska game that I wanted Nebraska to win as many games as they could after that dominant Michigan win. Personally, I'm a Michigan fan, as many of you know. And that's for two reasons. Number one, you're the best fan base in all of college football. You're motivated, you're persistent, you're patient, and you're committed, you're passionate, despite the team failing you really for the past decade. And number two, if Michigan's West Division opponents, specifically Michigan's, look better and have a good conference record, then Michigan, if they get in a three-way tie with Ohio State and Penn State, will get the nod to Indianapolis if they have the best out of division but still in conference opponent record. So the more conference games Nebraska wins, along with the more conference games that Minnesota and Purdue win, the more that benefits my team in case they drop one to Penn State or Ohio State, which, sneak preview, at this current moment, I don't think will happen, but I'm not going to attach myself to that because Ohio State, great football team, near elite, potentially elite football team, and Penn State, it's on the road. You never want to underestimate a Penn State team on the road, and I'm not underestimating this Penn State team. They have very serious talent at defensive end, linebacker, defensive back, and their defensive tackle room is improving as well. But to get back to Nebraska, keep on winning, keep your head high, stay motivated. Over the bye week, I'd like to see Nebraska try and improve, just try and get everyone healthy. Find ways to get Thomas Fidone the ball more, if you can, and work on ball security. I'd also say try and find a receiver who can step up more. I know that's going to be difficult, but Nebraska only had 154 passing yards, and 3 of those were to Fidone, but I think you need to get him involved even more. He came off the field at times, they were giving him plays here and there. He needs to get involved even more. And Marcus Washington, 1 reception for 39 yards. Marcus Washington needs to get involved as much as Billy Kemp and Thomas Fidone because Washington's a good player. He hasn't been as good as he was last season. He hasn't, lived up to many of our expectations, which our expectations are, meaningless, but it's just a point of analysis. But a better passing game would benefit Nebraska a lot because that will open up the run. I'm curious to see how Joshua Fleeks, if he gets involved more in the run game. He only had 1 carry for 1 yard. Emmett Johnson, true freshman, 7 carries for 29 yards, averaged 4 yards per attempt. So I'm curious to see how Fleeks and Johnson get more involved in the run game. It's encouraging to see that Johnson performed well and just having players step up more at receiver, the offensive line continuing to improve and get healthy. That will be important. And I think that will do Nebraska well moving forward because, again, I think 3-3, 4-2, maybe 5-1, that's a possibility for Nebraska in their remaining 6 games, and that would net them a 6-6, 7-5, 8-4 finish, which would be very, very impressive in Matt Rhule's first year. And his first year revives a program that hasn't gone bowling since 2016 and brings them to a bowl game in year 1. That'd be pretty powerful. That'd be a great statement. So that's all I have to say for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and quick shout out to my patrons, Spencer Bringhurst, my All-American, and Will Loftus, Gabriel Calendar, Roaming Gnome, and Matthew Sale, my all-conference patrons. Check out my Patreon page via the link in the description. It did not accurately predict Nebraska to beat Illinois, but it picked Illinois to win by 2, which means it picked Illinois to cover the spread. So potential power has still been about 50% or higher in predicting outcomes for spread. Overall, it's been much higher than that, actually, but I'm expecting it to come down to about an above average level of picking the spread, which is above 50%, but slightly above 50%. So if you want to get insider access to picks and my beta alpha project, which is potential power, check out my Patreon page and sign up as an All-American or Heisman member, and you will get videos about potential power and posts about my personal predictions for who's going to win games, who's going to cover, and also potential powers picks. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all around. If you're listening on Spotify, I typically don't mention this, but please follow the channel. I know that the Spotify page is growing. I've looked at it. I just think a lot of people haven't realized they can follow the channel. Have a great day, guys.